Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we are confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, on Wednesday of last week, we witnessed the third nationally televised GOP presidential candidate debate on CNBC. As one would expect from CNBC, the moderators behaved in a completely unprofessional manner. These debates should be about the policy positions of the candidates as opposed to the moderators' own political beliefs. Nevertheless, we are faced with more of the same from the radical left-wing mainstream media. Indeed, they have done a great disservice to the American electorate by refusing to focus on the quintessential and important issues facing each and every one of us. Mr. Carl Quintanilla started the debate by asking each candidate what they thought their personal weaknesses are. I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I found this question to be completely pointless. I am not convinced of the importance of their personal weaknesses. By far, the more pressing question should have been what each candidate believes with respect to the scope and application of our shared United States Constitution. Despite the importance of this question, none of the moderators at CNBC found it important enough to ask. This demonstrates why CNBC, and indeed the entire NBC network, has suffered in their ratings. They are completely disconnected with the day-to-day concerns of average, decent, hardworking American citizens. Consequently, they are unsure of which important questions to ask, and are rather driven by their own radical agenda, which serves no purpose other than their own. At this stage in the election cycle, the main concern of the American people is the policy positions of the candidates. As we have stated numerous times here on the Wright Flyer, the most important question should be what their beliefs are with respect to the United States Constitution. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas provided just that answer. He stated that his greatest strength was actually his passion with respect to that sacred document. However, the moderators ignored this and gave it very little attention. Instead, they were more interested in scoring political points by throwing dirt at the various candidates. However, that does nothing to change the fact that the litmus test used to determine whether a candidate is qualified for the office of President of the United States is to determine what their stance is with respect to and concerning the United States Constitution. With this in mind, I want to turn to Governor John Kasich's first response to the moderators. Kasich decided to attack the flat tax plan that was being offered both by Senator Ted Cruz and Dr. Ben Carson. He reasoned that this would only weaken the country by worsening the debt. Again, I fail to see how this has any connection with reality. Truth be told, Kasich wanted to continue to push for Medicare and Medicaid, despite the fact that both of these programs are already bankrupt. The American people cannot afford the type of system that John Kasich wants to put into place. We've already seen what disastrous results occur from this current Obama regime with overt government spending. The other thing that John Kasich mentioned was that it would be terrible to separate families by deporting illegal aliens. The moderators failed to ask the follow-up question, which should have been why Governor Kasich didn't want to enforce the laws already on the books. That really is the quintessential question which should have been asked at this point. Any candidate who comes out in support of amnesty or is expressly against the deportation of those who broke the law to come into this country should be asked why they do not wish to follow the laws that already exist. From Kasich's own mouth, we heard the words that he did not want to enforce the laws currently on the books because he thought it was unfair to families and was unduly cruel. Yet he made no mention about the countless thousands of American citizens who have been killed by illegal aliens each and every year. Again, this shows just how conceited not only the mainstream media is, but also the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. It shows that they wish only to push their agenda, irrespective of the things which actually matter to the American electorate.
Well, with regard to the first line of question, the opening question, what their weaknesses are, that's a setup if I've ever heard one. See, they want to know what their weaknesses are, so why? So the American people and the propagandists that institute all this propaganda could say, well, their weakness is such and such, so they're going to be weak on this, and it's going to detract away from this, this, and this. It's all a ploy. It's all a setup. That's what these leftist moderators do. Now, I'm with Ted Cruz to a certain degree when it comes to having these debates moderated by conservatives. I'm not too keen on his choice of conservatives, as he puts them. I would much rather have the debates moderated by American citizens who are conservatives, individuals that would ask the questions. I don't think Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh or even Mark Levin, to a certain degree, would ask quintessential questions such as, what is your understanding of the 10th Amendment? What is your understanding of the Due Process Clause? What is your understanding of the 14th Amendment, Section 1, when it pertains to privileges and immunities? These are the questions that we need to have answers to in order to properly gauge what their true conservative stance is. A question asked of one of those by Donald Trump, I honestly don't know what his answer would be. I think if it was an impromptu question, I don't think he'd be able to answer it. That's just me, that's my opinion. But these are the questions that need to be asked. And in regard to the Kasich attacking the flat tax, obviously Kasich doesn't understand, in the realm of the Constitution, what is the only three things that are utilized to be taxed: common defense, to pay the debts of the United States, and the general welfare of the United States. Those are the only three legal things that the Constitution authorizes for taxes to be collected on, the three main purposes. Now, they want to talk about the 16th Amendment, however, we could deal with that at another time, but the flat tax would specifically address those three issues. Everybody in the country, and the numbers would prove this, pay a flat tax of, let's say, 9%. I would be opposed to anything over 9% because, number one, when we tithe in churches, God only demands 10%. So even at 10%, it would give the government some kind of God complex to where they would equate themselves much more than what they do now as being equivalent to God. Anything above that, well, they would think that they're above God. So keep it at 9%. It'll fix the taxation problem. It will actually pay down the debt a lot quicker than people think. Because, folks, let's face it, 9% of whether your income is $1,000 or whether it's $100,000 or even $1 million, you're still paying the 9%. 9% is 9%. The more you make, yes, you're going to pay more because that's the more income you bring in. That's how all that would work. Flat tax would utilize that 9% percentage to be distributed amongst the common defense, or the military, to pay for the debts of the United States and the general welfare of the United States, meaning the functionality of the government itself, keeping the lights on, the power, water facilities, so on and so forth, paying their salaries, so on and so forth. It has nothing to do, and a lot of people don't understand this, when they hear the word general welfare, they think that is what the government gives to the citizens, or it applies strictly to the citizens. Our friend Nelson has actually made a great point on this in speaking to him before, that if that was the true case, that general welfare actually meant that it dealt with the citizens of the United States, it would mean that the government would be responsible for paying all of our debts, our mortgages, our car payments, even our cell phone bills, or even our cable. It would also mean that instantaneously every single citizen in the United States would have A++ credit because the government would be responsible for paying all of our debts. That is not the case. So Kasich, he needs to step back a little bit, and he needs to realize that the flat tax is a great idea. He may be in support more in tune of a fair tax, which is nothing but a value-added tax. That's trickle down, dealing with, suppliers. You have manufacturers. They have to pay a tax on their goods and services that they utilize in order to create a product. And then, of course, what do? To offset that, they have to increase the price of the product, which means then, when it's sold to the people, the taxes are higher on that, and it's just handed down all the way throughout the whole step of from production to consumption. That's a value-added tax. That is unconstitutional. You cannot do that. As far as the tax code that's on the books, that whole thing needs to be dissolved and redone. And if we go with the flat tax, that will actually possibly, if done properly, could eliminate the IRS, which, as we've seen in the past year, they've become unconstitutional themselves by violating federal law. Now, with regard to the illegal aliens and the families being torn apart and separated, this is why we already have laws on the books. When the laws on the books are enforced the legal way, and the laws are valid, that's how problems are solved. You cannot twist things around in order, because it's going to be emotionally defective to people. Their families are torn apart. Well, the thing is, their families aren't going to be torn apart, because if they look at the grand scheme of things, how many generations of illegals have come here, have been here for so long, and now they have more family members coming in, residing with them, or staying with them. They're illegal from the get-go. Anything that's illegal cannot exist legally. And this is why I have a problem with people utilizing the term, or the phrase, illegal immigration. That's an oxymoron. It cannot be done properly. You cannot illegally do something that's legal. Immigration is the legal means of which an individual comes into a country in order to gain citizenship. These people aren't looking to gain citizenship the legal way. They're not looking to gain citizenship by way of our naturalization laws. Therefore, they're holding out and waiting for amnesty or blanket citizenship to just be applied at the swipe of a pen. that will nullify all of our naturalization laws. They'll be unenforceable because the times will change, and of course the courts will uphold that because the courts themselves have become quasi-illegitimate because they do not want to enforce the Constitution. They don't want to enforce the laws and uphold the Constitution in congruence of each other. That's an issue. And when we have candidates like Kasich that believe that these things are actually going to work, we have to even raise the question, why are you even running? Why are you thinking that you're going to garner some kind of support from the American people that are vehemently opposed to many of these things that he talks about, but he wants to twist them and shift it around? He's playing word games with the people. We don't need people to play word games. We need people to give us straight answers, and we need to know what their stance is regarding the Constitution of the United States.
And this isn't the first time Kasich has had this issue. And part of what we say you have to do when you're evaluating a candidate is to look at their voting record and their past. When Kasich was in the Congress, he had voted in favor of the 1994 assault weapons ban. And I also thought it was funny that he rather arrogantly said that he was the one that had balanced the budget in the 1990s. No, he wasn't. He wasn't individually responsible for that. He didn't actually write that. It's just more obfuscation from this detente wing of the gutless opposition party attempting to hoodwink the people to making him think that he's accomplished more than he has. He also said that he spent his entire life balancing the federal budget. Well, let's actually flip that and say what that actually means. What he was truly saying there is, I haven't done anything in my life for most of my life other than be in the federal government. That's proof positive there that he's already had too much exposure with the government and that he's corrupt goods. There's no other way to put it. Kasich does not support the plank of the true conservative movements. And if you look at it, he really doesn't support the type of individualized sovereignty that is contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. He's right. He does have a proven track record. His proven track record is that he doesn't work within the confines, the scope, and application of the United States Constitution. Now, after the candidates finished with their introductions, the moderator turned to Donald Trump and attacked him. Basically, he didn't want to discuss the actual tax policies which Mr. Trump proposed. Rather, Mr. Quinatilia, or however you say his name, wanted to paint Mr. Trump in a bad light, thereby leaving a negative impression with the audience watching at home. This is political aggrandizement at its absolute worst. CNBC should be ashamed of itself, but that would suggest and presuppose that CNBC's staff and personnel have a conscience. The fact of the matter is they don't. Mrs. Becky Quick, one of the moderators involved with the debate, then attacked Dr. Ben Carson with respect to his flat tax proposal. She claimed that it would not generate enough revenue in order to fix the staggering debt faced by this country. Dr. Carson retaliated by stating that if we reduce the size of government by eliminating needless government agencies, which are, in fact, unconstitutional, then we would be able to secure enough revenue to sustain the government. Nevertheless, this answer failed to satisfy Ms. Quick, who continued to harp on the issue. It was at this point that Senator Cruz proposed his own flat tax plans, consisting of a 10% flat tax for individuals and a 16% tax rate for business entities, irrespective of whether they were large corporations or small businesses. And I agree with Jeremy on this one. I think 10% off the bat is too high and 16% is too high. I don't know why Cruz thinks that it's necessary to push those high numbers. That being said, his tax plan is better than any of the others out there that I've seen so far. But Cruz went on to claim that this method of flat taxation is the method by which we would prevent lobbyists from exerting undue influence over the various politicians in Washington, D.C. And of course, Jeremy, this is also similar to the tax plan that you were discussing just earlier in this segment, and also in the various discussions that we've had on the matter in the past. And it makes sense because it is in line with the tenets and principles contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. Folks, as Jeremy and I have reiterated numerous times on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, this is why it is so important to have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution. Within the four corners of that document, you will find any and all answers to the prevalent problems which are currently facing the nation as a whole. Using a constitutional lens, we are able to discern what the proper methodology for solving these problems should and ought to be. As Mr. Cruz demonstrated, a flat tax in line with the constitutional principles of taxation, which Jeremy had outlined, the national defense, the keeping the government up and running, those types of things would be the best suggestion for simplifying our outrageous tax system and our out of control internal revenue code here in America. I believe at last count it's well over 70,000 pages, which is absolutely stunning and ridiculous. The government, under the current Internal Revenue Code, exerts far too much power and control over the American people. We have seen how it is being used to the political advantage of the extreme and radical left, such as through the targeting of conservative organizations by former IRS Chief Lois Lerner. What's more, we have seen that the so-called grand old party lacks the wherewithal to actually move forward with punishing those who have infringed upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of the American citizenry. Lois Lerner is not going to be prosecuted. This is because the Department of Justice is in cahoots with the Obama administration, and thereby is not an objective or independent wing unto itself as it is constitutionally intended to be. And see, this was another missed opportunity by the moderators at CNBC to ask a truly prevalent question which is totally on point with this issue. And that question should be, whenever your department heads are acting in a way that is outside the scope of the Constitution, what are you willing to do to ensure that we return to strict adherence of the Constitution? Would you immediately remove that individual for violating their oath of office? That is the question that should have been asked. And that is the question which was not asked. And that is a shame.
You know, with the whole healthcare thing, and you mentioned Kasich, bringing up the healthcare issue and all this other stuff, another question that should have been asked was, and it should be asked across the board, with these moderators. This is what I have a problem with the moderation of these debates. They seem to cherry pick certain candidates to ask certain questions, but none of the other candidates get a chance to answer that question. I think all questions asked should be directed at each individual candidate and give them each an opportunity to answer that question, because now what that's doing, it's taking away from the integrity, so to speak, of what the candidate's strengths might be. You could have one candidate that's all for, government health care, the Affordable Care Act. So, yeah, we don't like it, but we can change it or we'll repeal it. Another candidate might just come out and say it's completely unconstitutional and we're not going to enforce it. There's two different views right there that answer the same question. And this goes right back to the IRS and the problem with the tax code, because now the IRS has been the ones that have been delegated the authority to enforce this penalty tax for individuals who do not have health care. They don't have any constitutional authority to do that. Furthermore, that authority delegated to them was done so by the Supreme Court, which has no authority whatsoever to delegate any authorities to any government agency. None. So now they have this ill-gotten, illegitimate power and authority that's going to be placed down on the people. This would tie right in as to why the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is unconstitutional. It's so many ways, and we don't have enough time on the show. We may even do a solo flight or another show pertaining specifically to the Affordable Care Act. And we'll delve into that with the unconstitutionality of it, every aspect that we can come across. And trust me, folks, there's a lot. I've covered many of them just on my own accord. The point is, these moderators need to be put in check. And I think, and I believe Ted Cruz did that on Wednesday night when he told them, look, it doesn't matter if, this candidate, can you do math? Can you do this? Or what's your fantasy team like? So all of those things, he nipped it right in the bud, and I think he put the kibosh on it. We're still going to see a little bit of, different lines of questioning per candidate, which I don't think they'll ever get away from it. They should, but I don't think they're going to. They're not going to give the Republican candidates a fair shake in this, because they're always going to be geared towards setting them up to where anything that they can say will be used against them in the court of public opinion of the people, and also used by the propagandists to say, well, you said this in the debate, now how does that work with this? And they'll twist it and morph it into something else for a different issue, and they'll try and tie it together to make them look weak and destroy their credibility. Again, going back, Cruz has a great idea. I would like to see it taken a step further. Let's put together a town hall type style debate where you have one moderator and his sole job is basically to pass the microphone to individual voters so that they can ask their questions, because that is who should be asking the questions. We the people are voting for these individuals. We the people should have the authority to question them, to question their stance on such things as, what's your constitutional stance on this? How do you perceive the Constitution is this way regarding this issue? So on and so forth. Things like abortion. I don't think abortion has even come up yet that I've heard. If it has, I probably wasn't paying attention. I'm going to be honest, I haven't really watched the debates. I've heard snippets here and there. But the thing is, people say, well, abortion's not a big issue right now. We're worried about the economy. Folks, the economy does not matter if the Constitution is not followed and adhered to, because that is what gives us the authority to enjoy a fruitful economy. If we don't have our rights secured and protected and the Constitution not followed, you can have the best economy in the world, but it's not going to mean anything when those individuals that have authority over you tell you, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is why we're stressing time and time again having an understanding. That way, if there was a town hall type debate where a moderator did nothing but play microphone jockey and had them hand the microphone to individual constituents and voters so that we the people could ask the questions. And it shouldn't be done just with the Republicans. Let's do it with the Democrats too. Let's do it all the way across the board. That way we will have a better understanding. And that also will eliminate, to a certain degree, the individual candidates being prepared for those questions. I want them on their toes. I want them to be able to answer off the top of their head certain individual questions that pertain to the Constitution. Are there going to be individuals that are paid to be in the audience to ask certain questions? Most assuredly, that will happen. But it will happen far less as far as structured and orientated and prepared lines of questioning with prepared scripted answers. I want honest answers. I want honest questioning, honest answers, and I think that would be the way to do it. Ted Cruz is on the right path for that. I still think we should take it a step further and have we the people do the questioning.
And that's the way it was done in the past. If you go back to the beginning of this country, you'll find that the people were incredibly involved in the political process. They actually knew and understood that they had a direct impetus and impact on the country as a whole. And that is why they were so involved. But as the government has grown and become more intrusive, we're seeing that the people have less and less of an opportunity to be directly involved. And that's been part of the charade by the mainstream media working to disenfranchise the people. And unfortunately, that's why you will hear people come out and say, well, I'm just not going to vote because my vote doesn't really matter. Wrong. You need to exercise your fundamental and unalienable right to vote to ensure that you have a say in the process. And while it may seem meaningless, it actually isn't. That way, you can be justified in saying, look, you're not listening to me. You're supposed to represent me, and you are failing in every form and capacity with respect to that. And that is why we have that election process. Folks, America is a representative republic, and that relates to the fact that we elect these people to represent us. When they fail to do so, they are completely derelict in their duty, and they should be held accountable for it. And I believe that a town hall style debate, like what Jeremy has mentioned and what has been floated out by Ted Cruz, would be a phenomenal way to actually gauge that and encourage participation by the electorate. After all, they're supposed to be our servant, although they're doing everything in their power to claim that we should be their servant. That's actually totally contrary to the tenets of natural law on which our Constitution is based. Now, one of the things that El Jefe Jeb Bush stated during his introduction of the debate was that his greatest weakness is his sense of impatience. I would be inclined to agree up to a point. I actually think that his greatest weakness, from a political standpoint, is his failure to adhere to the principles outlined in the four corners of the United States Constitution. Mr. Bush has continually pushed for Common Core education, which is a disastrous national standard for education in the country. If you take any civics exam from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, you'd find that most of today's students would fail. They'd be unable to answer the questions. Folks, those exams included questions like, who is the Speaker of the House? And who is the Secretary of the Army? These are important facts that we should all know. Back then, students were expected to be knowledgeable about their system of government. It was expected that they would actively and proactively participate within that government. Today, they are being indoctrinated by a failed educational policy like that of Common Core. I say Mr. Bush is impatient because he doesn't want to change his position on this and grows impatient with those of us who want to force the government back into a strict adherence of the principles and tenets contained within our shared Constitution. That really isn't something he should be impatient with. Nonetheless, he is adamant about doubling down on these standards, which are actually harming this country as a whole. Our Constitution should never be open to negotiation or change except through the proper channels of the amendment process as outlined in Article 5. Yet, that's what Mr. Bush and his ilk believe, that we should change it willy-nilly. They're the ones that advocate this erroneous claim that the Constitution is a living document. It's like a rehashing of that compassionate conservative nonsense that his brother spewed back in 2000. In fact, during the entire debate, I don't believe that El Jefe gave a single memorable answer. That's because his policies are not memorable. They're ghastly and destructive. The American electorate deserves better than he, and his dismal poll numbers show that they are on to his scheme. In a way, I think old El Jefe thought he could just waltz into the race and then finish up in the White House with no effort whatsoever. However, the American people are tired of the political powers that be. No matter what El Jefe Jeb Bush might try and say, he is the personification of the failed policies of the past. Yet, El Jefe isn't the only candidate who stood on that stage who is out of touch with the American people. Another one is John Kasich. And I hate to go back to him, but he came out swinging, as I mentioned earlier. He had the appearance of being annoyed, sort of like the schoolyard bully who pouts after he has been caught red-handed. However, he went on to state that he is the only one with experience who can fix this country. He pointed to his surplus in Ohio and has claimed that he was also the architect of the balanced budget that occurred in the Clinton years. Folks, that seems a rather arrogant claim on his part, as I mentioned before, but he left out the part where he voted for the 1994 assault weapons ban, where he successfully abridged the fundamental and unalienable right of the people to keep and bear arms for a very long time. Now that this is history, and we've gotten rid of that, we shouldn't reverse course and elect a man who is diametrically opposed to our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. It would be asinine to do so. The more he spoke, the more John Kasich proved that he is a terrible candidate for president. Every policy position which is near and dear to him is contrary to the clear and concise language of the United States Constitution. Again, this is why Jeremy and I are so adamant about you gaining a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution. When you have such knowledge, it becomes exceedingly easy to spot the deceptive ploys and tricks of these politicians. Kasich lamented that the other candidates were making promises which they couldn't keep, but his whole shtick of balancing the budget without pointing to any constitutional examples of how he could do it or where he would have the authority to do it fell as flat as his claim that he is a principled conservative. Nothing could be further from the truth. Under a President Kasich, we'd simply get more of the same nonsense that put us in the horrific position we are in today. To be honest, Jeremy, I can't distinguish the policy differences between El Jefe and John Kasich.
Well, what it is, they actually share something in common. They've bought into this whole line of political correctness drivel. You know, you mentioned the civics test back in the turn of the century and whatnot, that it was expected of the students to know things about their government. That expectation is still there, but it's not the same expectation that once was. Their expectation now is to know things about their government, that the government is there to provide for you. The government is your keeper. The government does this. The government provides all. That's the expectation that they are expected to be held to now. What's lacking now with this, and because of Common Core and because of political correctness and indoctrination, there is no encouragement. Back then they were expected, but they were also encouraged to learn about their government, to learn about the Constitution. Kids nowadays, students aren't encouraged to learn the facts of the Constitution, to learn the role of the government. No, they're encouraged to be submissive to the government. And Jeb Bush and Kasich both share that in common with their ideology. They're pushing for this. They want people to be expected and encouraged to be submissive to what their ideology is. This is one of the key tentacles that is tearing apart this nation, and they've done it incrementally over time, over and over. And the more people like Jeb Bush and Kasich stand up and run for office, the further that's going to be perpetuated, and the dumbing down of the people is going to continue. Individuals like that, they shouldn't even be in the running for this. Just because they're poisoning the well is what they're doing. And again, this ties right in with having the town hall style debates that I mentioned. Because if you have individuals asking the questions that are encouraging themselves and others to ask questions that should be expected of their knowledge for how the government operates, how the Constitution is to be applied, you'll see people like Jeb Bush throw their hat in the race, and then after the first debate, they're done. They're gone. It's like they never existed in the debates. And that will make room for true leaders to step forward, people that actually have an understanding, a fluent working knowledge of the Constitution, a proper understanding as expected by the people that are going to vote them to lead us. They will be able to come out and show and be adamant that they're the true leaders of the country. These are the individuals that the people truly do want. Now, what's going on is Kasich and Bush, they are telling people what they want to hear. I've voiced my opinion on this numerous times, not only on here, but also outside of the show, at school, when I was in school, in various different forums and whatnot. People need to understand this very key thing. These candidates will tell you what they want you to hear, but they will not tell you what you need to hear. That is the true difference. We need to hear that this candidate that wants to run for president is going to follow the Constitution. We need to hear that they're going to say, we have to get rid of these unconstitutional agencies that are sucking up the funding for this country to operate financially. We need to hear that they have our best interest in mind. They're not going to violate the Constitution with things like an assault weapons ban that happened in 1994, or high-capacity magazines, or ammunition bans, or restriction of any kind of votes of constitutional rights whatsoever. Voters' rights. And this is the other thing, folks. When Randy said that you need to go out and vote, it's that old adage, that old saying that goes, with anything in life, if you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't go out and vote for a person that has your principles, your core values in mind and at heart, if you just stay home because the field is cluttered with individuals that don't fit your individual thoughts and process, you will never fully be able to vote ever again eventually, because it will be whittled away and done away with, to where eventually, and we've seen this through voter fraud, redistricting of the communities, so on and so forth. They're trying every single facet. This is a complete onslaught, an attack on the Constitution. Every little way that they can take every little piece from the Constitution and twist it and use it and abuse it against you so that they can maintain full control. That's what's going on here. If there's no candidate that's in the running, that's on the main stage as far as the debates go, find a third-party candidate if need be. Vote. For God's sake, do not just sit back and vote. You're doing yourself a disservice, as well as your country. Vote for who you want. Vote for who has your principles and values in mind. Vote your conscience. If there's a third-party candidate that nobody's ever heard of, and you still go out and vote for them, you know what? You can sleep at night, because you know that you've done your part, your obligation as a citizen, to cast a vote. It also gives you, as Randy said, the authority and the legitimacy to be able to voice your opinion, say, no, you're not following the tenets of the Constitution. You're not fully representing me. If you don't vote, you don't have a voice. That's the way it works. Even though voting is a right, you can vote however you want. If you don't want to vote, okay, that's your right to not vote. But remember this. If you sit back and you're not exercising your rights to vote, you are surely tossing in the ring everything, or just tossing it right overboard, any and all of your other rights. Because again, all of our rights work in concert with each other. You have to exercise your rights in order as part of your maintenance to preserve your rights. Again, it is our Constitution, your Constitution, mine, Randy's, and everybody else's. It belongs to we, the people. If we don't exercise it in full, then surely everything else will come raveling apart at the seams, because not exercising one right prohibits us from being able to exercise other rights at a later point in time.
And it coincides with the fact that every fundamental and unalienable right we have coincides with a duty or obligation. With respect to the fundamental and unalienable right to vote, there is the duty to actually vote. Now, you are not forcefully required to do so, nor should you ever forcefully be required to exercise your rights. That being said, it does presuppose that the duty is that you go out and exercise that right. And that is the duty with all of our rights. Do not use your rights in a way that infringes upon others. If you think about it, if you're not voting for somebody who represents you, then you're also infringing upon the rights of others who think like you do, who are like-minded, because you are potentially denying their candidate the chance to win office. Now, that's not to say that those who sit back when there's a GOP candidate that is like Mitt Romney, who was diametrically opposed to many constitutional issues and had proven himself to be wishy-washy and not principled at all, that is different. To say if you go and vote third party for that, that's not a problem, because you are still voicing your opinion. You are not selecting the choice that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party was attempting to force upon you. And I see no problem with that. And I think Jeremy also had mentioned that you could sleep at night. Well, yes, you absolutely could, because you still exercised your right and you had lived up to the duty and obligation that affixes itself to that right. Now, one of the important answers offered by Senator Cruz was growth. He claimed that the answer to government revenue and the current debt crisis in America is to remove the draconian regulations which are strangling business in America and thereby allow the economy to flourish. It's a major problem that has been facing the country. With each successive president of the United States, nothing has been done to curtail the executive branch agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency and various other unconstitutional agencies, from passing these edicts which are harming real growth in America. However, yet again, the moderators ignored this point and continued to harp on their pet left-wing ideology and projects. It was absolutely sickening to see the way in which they wanted to divert attention away from the real issues simply to attack the candidates personally. Carly Fiorina contended that the American people are frustrated with the political powers that be because they speak often of tax reform, yet nothing is done. She too said that we need to drastically simplify the taxation system in America. I wish she had gone into more detail like Senator Cruz, Mr. Trump, or even Dr. Carson. She offered some vague hints of a plan of her own. I understand that we need to simplify the tax system, but we also need more from our leaders than simply pointing out the fact that nothing of substance has been done for generations. Pointing out a problem's good, but she should have proposed a detailed, real-world, practical solution to the problem instead of merely lamenting about it and giving us some vague, illusory pointing to it, to whatever solution she might have. Again, Senator Cruz was the only one who really shined on this topic. He showed a working knowledge of his tax proposal and was able to rebut all of the counter-arguments proffered by Becky Quick. That is the sort of, and pun intended here, quick wit that is needed to ensure that the country is on the right path again. Of course, no singular individual will be able to restore this country. Jeremy and I have oftentimes repeated the fact that we need to fundamentally transform governmental thinking. Obama said we should fundamentally transform the country. He's wrong. It's the government which needs to be fundamentally transformed. And of course, the next question that we see was posed to Senator Rubio. Quintanilla asked him whether he should resign, as an editorial in the Sun Sentinel had proposed, because he had missed a huge number of important votes. This understandably angered Mr. Rubio, who came back to the double standard that exists within the media. While I'm no fan of Marco Rubio, I do agree that the double standard within the mainstream media is sickening. They are purposefully and intentionally obfuscating the real issues which matter to the American people. The only thing they care about is their own agenda. Well, that's not helpful to any of us. It just shows how out of touch these radical left-wing zealots really are. El Jefe, however, seized upon this opportunity to attack Rubio. He claimed that he was doing a disservice to his constituents by failing to be present for a great many of these important votes. How laughable it is that he forgets his own brother spent a lot of time on the campaign trail instead of serving the constituents of Texas when he was governor. I remember it, though. Jeb again showed himself to be tone deaf and out of touch. To be honest, I don't even really know why he's running in the first place. If he cannot even convey himself in a presidential manner, then he has no place on being on that stage. None whatsoever.
You know, and again, this goes back to, you know, certain style debates. Now, I know if Randy had his way, we would have Hamilton Burr style debates, and I don't think that'd be such a bad idea either. Some of these individuals that are running, namely Governor Bush, you know, the thing is, again, and Randy asked the question, why is he even running? If he can't conduct himself in the fashion that is of being presidential, how is he going to conduct himself if, by hopes, and I quease when I say this, he actually gets elected as president? See, this is one of my biggest fears, and folks, I'm here to tell you, there really isn't anything in this world that I'm frightened of, but it creates a very, very bad chill for me to think that at some point there's the possibility that because the Democrats really don't have anything, they have no one to actually step up to the podium. They have Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders is kind of rounding out their whole, nomination process. Now, if something happens if neither one of them get the nomination, this bone-chilling feeling that I get when I think about it is that the detente wing of the GOP will actually put somebody, do whatever they can, take whatever measures they need to put somebody like Jeb Bush up as the nominee. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, Bush is running out of money and this and that. Remember back in 2008, John McCain also ran out of funding. Lo and behold, what happened? He got a windfall full of funding, and it pushed him right back in, and he actually took the lead and became the nominee. I don't want that kind of history to repeat itself. I'm actually advocating for either Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton to become the nominee for the Democrats. For the simple fact is, if that was to happen, people like Jeb Bush would not be forced or pushed into that as a false premise or a false sense that, well, if they're not the nominee, then we've already got this thing in the bag. That's kind of like I don't know, premature, whatever you want to call it. That's what gives me this chill up and down my spine. Because if neither one of them are the nominee, rest assured, I can tell you right now, the GOP will do whatever they can to put someone like Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, or even John Kasich up as the nominee. They're going to do whatever they can to railroad individuals like Donald Trump, or Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, or any other individual that has more sense, more common sense, for that matter, pertaining to the Constitution or things that actually need to get done. Now, I'm not a big Trump fan. I don't think he understands the Constitution as he should. I think a lot of what he said on the Constitution was scripted for him and it was prepared. This is why I would be in favor of having these town hall style debates, because if you have an individual, let's say such as myself, or Randy, or our friend Nelson, or many other people, even some of you, our listeners, were there, and you stood up and you'd ask the question, impromptu, can you explain to us what the Fourth Amendment entails? And if they stagger on it, and they stutter, and they have to search for words to explain it, that tells me that they really don't know it. And if they don't know something as simple as the Fourth Amendment when it pertains to illegal searches and seizures and the right for people to be secure in their papers, persons, and effects against unwarranted and illegal search and seizures, if they can't explain that, they have no business running for any office. None, not even local dog catcher, because at that point they have to take the same oath that our military does, that Randy took when he finished law school and became a member of the Texas Bar, our police officers, so on down the line. If they don't understand the very thing that they are going to have to take an oath on, they don't deserve to be there. Why should they be? Well, they deserve to be. Why? Because they may have money? Because they may be a social icon? That's not enough. That's a recipe for destruction for our country. Our country has to be, we have to have leaders that will formulate and base their actions and their decisions and carry out their sworn-in duty in accordance with the Constitution. I don't want somebody up there just because they're a multi-billionaire and they own a bunch of real estate, or because they have this or they've been a senator for this. I want someone who's going to do the right thing, that actually understands why they are there. Not just because, well, I have money, I can do what I want. No. If that's the case, why don't we just go out and vote for Kim Kardashian?
Oh, because that would be insufferable. There is no other way to describe that. You know, Jeb went on to say that no one should vote for him if they want the gridlock in Washington to continue. Again, this was a rather conceited statement and completely disregards what real policies would be beneficial to the American electorate. If Washington is going to push for the pet projects he likes, such as Common Core education and illegal amnesty, then it is in the best interest of the American people for the gridlock in D.C. to continue. The last thing we need is more draconian edicts being handed down by the political elite from their nest up there in D.C. In fact, the most beneficial thing that they could do, if that is to be the case, meaning pushing more of the same, would be to simply do nothing. El Jefe then argued that he has a proven, effective leadership record. Well, I recall that he moved to curtail free speech by ordering the removal of the Southern Cross battle flag from all governmental buildings, irrespective of whether there was a historical connotation and context behind the flag being included at that government building. Perhaps this is tying in to his revisionist strain, which would be in line with the sort of lessons which are taught under the Common Core education system. Again, I don't believe that El Jefe would be a good choice for, as Jeremy put it, dog catcher, much less President of the United States of America. Bush stated that a vast majority of Americans and Republicans are hopeful about the future. Yet, as I recall, he was the one that said that it is an act of love for an illegal alien to cross the border outside the scope of well-established immigration law. Now, if that is the type of hopeful future that we get to look for, count me out. This is the sort of madness which shows that that he has no love or allegiance to the United States Constitution. That in and of itself should unquestionably disqualify him from holding the highest office in the land. Therefore, he has no proven history of effective leadership. Rather, he has a proven history and track record of attempting to tear apart our shared Constitution. Bush then harped on about income inequality. He stated that it's worse under Obama than before he assumed the reins of power. While this is true, it is irrelevant if you don't follow the confines of the United States Constitution. I say this because failing to adhere to the United States Constitution will only breed more income inequality. These wannabe potentates are seriously harming the social fabric of the United States. And their policies accomplish nothing other than amassing even greater power into their unworthy hands. We need true leadership, and that's something which El Jefe doesn't comprehend. He has no answers which are good for the country, and he's hoping that the American electorate isn't paying enough attention to realize that he doesn't have their best interests at heart. It's amazing to watch him deliver his lines in such a disinterested manner. It's like he's bored, and it's also like he has no convictions. Of course, that is because he actually has no convictions. He only cares about himself and ensuring that the Bush family can continue to gain ever greater political influence and control in the United States. I think 2 Bush presidencies are enough to last a lifetime. We need fresh blood. We need leaders who know, understand, and embrace our shared Constitution. And you know, what's amazing about all of it is that there are people out there who actually say that Jeremy and I are radicals because we believe that the government should go back to strict adherence of the policies and tenets and principles contained within the 4 corners of the United States Constitution. Since when did requiring people to follow the law become a radical position? Well, it's been ever since the time that the Fabian socialists have managed to take over and basically run ramshod through education, through media, and through various levels of government. They have developed this long-term plan to implement their belief system. And it has taken root. And if we do not become proactive in the maintenance and defense of our fundamental and unalienable rights, they will succeed in completely uprooting everything of value here in the United States.
Well, I have a news flash here, Randy, as far as being radical. Every single one of our passengers that listens devoutly to our show, they're radicals as well. Every single one of them. Because in listening to our shows and aligning themselves or looking at things at a different perspective as saying, gee, I never thought about that, or that's an interesting way of putting it and makes much more sense than what we've been told by the mainstream media, or so on and so forth. You know what? I don't mind being called a radical, because, see, their idea of calling me a radical, well, that's just their ignorance. Again, they've taken the term radical, and it's not just the term radical. Our founding fathers were considered to be terrorists by the Crown, in the true sense of the word, because they invoked and struck fear and terror in the British Armed Forces and what they did in preserving and establishing our country. Now, this current administration would call us not only radicals, but they call us homegrown domestic terrorists. Not only myself, Randy, but our listeners as well. Because we latch on to the idea and we understand the core fundamental principles of why this country was founded. They don't like that. It makes them afraid that individuals like all of us have a working knowledge or an understanding, even if it's a bare minimum understanding of the Constitution. They are afraid of we the people, as they should be. Because we the people are the ones with our Constitution, we have the authority, not them. We delegate authority to them to govern us. Why? So that we don't have an anarchic society and we don't tear each other apart. Laws are a good thing, but laws are only good if they're if they're working in concurrence with the supreme law of the land. They don't like people being able to say, well, you know what, that law is unconstitutional, you can't enforce it. What do? They enforce it anyways. They become bullies and tyrants, and they drive it down people's throats. And they're able to do that because people are indoctrinated. They are not encouraged or expected to understand the Constitution the way our founding fathers had outlined it. They want us to understand what they want us to understand, not what our founding fathers put forth for us, not what the Constitution says, not how things are supposed to be done in accordance of the Constitution. That makes them afraid, and that's fine with me. That's absolutely fine with me. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Now with Jeb Bush and his whole thing of, oh, well, you know, I want to continue the family dynasty name in politics, so on and so forth. Just stop. Do the American people and the world a favor and stop. Just get out. We don't want you. I do not want him as president. I don't want him as the nominee. I could not in good conscience point to anything that he has said or done that would actually invigorate me to cast a vote for him. He may be a decent guy, a friendly guy, the kind of guy that you'd want to sit down at a bar with and have a beer or two with. That's all fine and well. That's good. But that's where it ends. He's not the kind of guy that I would want leading our country in any way, shape, or form. And that could be said for several other individuals. We have to get back to the founding and underlying principles of what this country is all about. It's humane, or it's proper to allow people to come in. You know, that tells me, that's a person, when they say something like that, it's okay and it's proper for people to come across our borders and not have to worry about the immigration laws. That tells me that if he's willing to do that, he would also be willing to allow other countries that have detrimental means in mind for the United States. Terrorists, true terrorists, like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, all of these individuals and entities that want to do nothing but destroy the United States. Well, hey, that's fine and proper, just come on in. That's the message that I'm receiving from him when he says things like that. Our country is designed to be that of the last bastion of hope, freedom, and liberty for individuals, because all men are created equal. This whole income inequality crap, I don't want to hear it. Because it's only income inequality if people don't take the ambition and pull themselves up by their bootstraps and take the initiative to go out and make something of themselves. But no, again, we go back to this political correctness. People aren't expected to do that anymore because they're expected to rely on the government. This is what El Jefe wants. This is what John Kasich wants. This is what individuals like that want. They want us to be dependent on them. And they don't want us to be the ones that hold their jobs in the balance and in our hands so we don't have the authority to hold them accountable. That's what they want. I'm not going to abide by that. As long as I'm breathing, the United States Constitution will be in full force and effect. I don't care if it takes my final breath to make it so. That's the way it's going to be. And there's nobody on this planet that is big enough or walks hard enough to stop me from doing that. They're going to have to put me 6 feet under, and even when that happens, it's still going to be the way that I'm proposing now.
Yes, and we have to be proactive in the maintenance and defense of our fundamental and unalienable rights. That is the duty that we have been tasked with. That is part of the purpose of a natural law system, and it cannot be denied that the United States of America is based off of natural law principles. It goes to the very root and core of who we are as a people, and it's it is the core of how we were founded. And of course, things like Common Core education purposefully obfuscate that and take that away so that students don't learn of the true foundational principles of this country. And that's dangerous, absolutely dangerous. One thing that the debate moderators struggled with was Carly Fiorina's tax plan. And I admit that I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the program, and had mentioned that it was just briefly outlined, but they seem to be bothered by the fact that she wished to reduce the amount of pages in the tax code from 70,000 to 3. Nevertheless, her plan is not a flat tax, or at least not as she explained it. Again, I wasn't really sure that she went into particulars at all with respect to how she would reform the tax system here in America. Despite this, the moderators seem to hate the idea that the tax code should be simplified. It bothered him. It just goes to show that what they want is an increase in taxes. The radical and extreme fringe of the left would like to see the tax code made even more complicated and complex because they want to increase taxes exponentially. Again, as Jeremy and I have explained on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, if you really want to see the tax code simplified, all you have to do is return to the tenets and principles as outlined in the four corners of the United States Constitution. Every answer, whether it be political or economic, will be found within the Constitution. This is because the Founding Fathers intended the Constitution to outline and define the way proper government should work in the United States. Pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, it is our Constitution which serves the purpose as supreme law of the land. Therefore, any and all forms of taxation must adhere to the principles that are contained within that sacred document. It's funny, but the simple truth seems to baffle the left-wing moderators. Worse still, it also baffles the detente wing of the Grand Old Party. Ever since Obama assumed the reins of power, the detente wing of the Grand Old Party has done everything in its power to capitulate, thereby giving the regime everything it has demanded. Each and every member of Congress, except for a few, is all too happy to give more power to the federal government at the expense of the true sovereigns, we the people of the United States of America. Despite this, it does not change the fact that the people are the true and ultimate arbiters of sovereignty in the United States. I'm now going to shift to one thing that Carly Fiorina said. She mentioned that socialism occurs when the government creates a problem and then claims to have the only solution for it. I would agree to a point. However, I think socialism goes further than that. Socialism is a cancerous doctrine that shrouds itself in the facade of being beneficial to the average or common person. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Socialism poisons the population, setting class against class. And, it coincides with the doctrine of divide and conquer. The utopian socialists want to divide the people, thereby allowing them to conquer them. That is the true and devious nature of socialism. Just look at the way that the race issues have been handled by this current regime. They want to divide us. When they called George Zimmerman a white Hispanic, that shows you that they really, really, really want to split the hairs on it. Again, it goes back to this fact that they always play a game of semantics, but you can't play a game of semantics when it comes to our fundamental and unalienable rights. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what religion you are or where you come from. If you are a naturalized citizen or a natural-born citizen, the Constitution applies equally to you. That is the true sense of equality. The equal application of the law. It has nothing to do with wealth. It has nothing to do with the outcomes. We each have an equal opportunity to go out and use our talents to make the best of ourselves. Does that mean that we're going to have equal results? Not by a landslide. Not at all. But it means that the government cannot just come in and, in an arbitrary and capricious manner, tell you that you cannot be all that you can. They cannot come in and use these edicts, or what the courts have coined as positive discrimination, to tell you what you can and cannot do with respect to your abilities. That is impermissible. And that is a major problem that we are contending with here in the United States, because the court systems are openly embracing this so-called positive discrimination. And again, did we hear anything about that from the debate moderators? Of course not. They don't want to address it because they are the ones perpetuating the problem in the first place.
Well, let's take a look at this positive discrimination. A baker, a Christian baker, a guy who owns a cake shop, is threatened with being jailed, fined hundreds of thousands of dollars because he refused to bake a wedding cake for a homosexual couple. And then just recently, you had some trucking company that hired some Muslim individuals who fully well knew that they were going to be delivering alcohol. They decided that, well, it's against our religion for you to force us to deliver alcohol, so we're going to sue you. And they won. I believe it was something to the tune of $240,000 each individual. Now, talk about semantics. It's okay for an individual to exercise their constitutional right of freedom of religion and sue an individual company and win because it violates their constitutional rights, but it's not okay for another individual to exercise the same constitutional rights in owning and operating their business. They get punished or penalized. This is why the courts are and the legal system is completely out of control. Because they've stepped away from the confines. They have not applied that doctrine, the exercising of the First Amendment, equally in both cases. So that tells me that there is no more equal protection under the law. Because to take an individual and fine them and penalize them because they don't agree with a certain ceremony or the way a religious ceremony is conducted because it goes against his religion, but yet we have individuals that are of some sort of faith that many would contend and argue that is not even a religion but a cult. How does that work? How does that work at all? And you can look at this as saying as the baker is actually, not only was his First Amendment rights violated, but also his 14th Amendment rights of privileges and immunities at the state level was violated. Because you are immune from prosecution. That's what the privileges and immunities means. You are immune from prosecution for exercising your privileges and rights. We've touched on that on our show entitled Privileges and Immunities. It was very well explained, and it was explained probably the best way that it ever could have been. So now there's repetitious violations of different rights of that baker, but yet they utilize that and they want to apply it in a reverse standard because the individual that sued, or the individuals that sued this trucking company because they were required, part of their job that they knew was one of their job descriptions was to deliver alcohol. They turn around and use the Constitution for a malicious lawsuit. This is what our country has come down to. And it's going to get worse. If we continue to allow people to utilize the Constitution to destroy the Constitution, which, by the way, was the sole principle of why the ACLU was formulated and created, as per Roger Nash Baldwin, one of the co-founders of the ACLU, he's the one who said, our whole means and auspice of existence is to utilize the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. If we allow these things to continue to happen, and we don't maintain our rights, and we don't hold others accountable for violating them, or utilizing the Constitution in order to violate our rights, which is a violation of the Ninth Amendment, because no right in the Constitution could be used to deny or disparage other rights enumerated in the Constitution. If we could continue to allow this to happen, this is what they want. This is how the Constitution becomes irrelevant in the grand scheme of things in their mind, because if they're allowed to utilize it to destroy it, and they get the people on board with doing it by way of indoctrination, by propaganda, by creating this expectancy for them to understand that the government knows what's best for us, and then they're encouraged to think that way, our country is going to exist no more. It will be obliterated. But again, like I told all of you, and I've told several individuals this, as long as I'm drawing a breath, I'm going to do whatever I can within my legal means to prevent this from continuing, to put a stop to it. And I would encourage all of you, our listeners, to do the same, to take your Constitution and understand it, and exercise it, put it to work for you, to prevent this from continuing to happen. Because, folks, if we don't, that falls right along with that adage that we've repeated on here time and time again, that quote from Benjamin Franklin. If we don't do this, then that means we're falling for a false sense of security, and we're trading our liberties for that sense of security, and we are going to lose both. We deserve neither, and we will lose both.
You know, this is why it is so important to analyze all of the current political happenings through a constitutional lens. Again, we believe that the knowledge pertaining to the Constitution that you can gain by proactively engaging in conversation about it will enable you to look at the debates that are happening, to evaluate each of the candidates on his or her merit, and make an educated decision as to what will be good for the country. Each and every one of us has that duty and that responsibility. And this is why Jeremy and I go to such lengths to provide this show to you. It is because we understand that our fundamental and unalienable rights are not able to be taken away from us by any legitimate authoritative government. Unfortunately, our government has strayed so far away from that that we can't even get to see what our rights ought to be, how our rights ought to be implemented. Our future generations are being deprived of the actual working knowledge of this because they don't want this information to be known. And that's shocking, because this is the greatest birthright of any people on the face of the earth, the ability to have our shared constitution. That was the bequestment that our founding fathers made to us after spilling so much blood, sweat, tears, and toil, and yes, even risking their sacred honor to provide us with our fundamental and unalienable rights protected by the Constitution. They were the channel through which Providence endowed us with our rights. And all they were doing was establishing a system which would protect those rights which are endowed to us by our Creator. Therefore, only our Creator has the authority to take those rights away unless we recklessly infringe upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of our fellow citizen. And that is why it is so important to gain this working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution and the fundamental and unalienable rights that each and every one of us have. And when you look at what the Democrat Party was doing in their debate, it was quite clear that they would besmirch, belittle, and strip away each and every one of our fundamental and unalienable rights if they could have the carte blanche and their way. And again, this is why when you have this power of knowledge, you can stand up to these potentates, to these despots, to these tyrants, and say, no, enough is enough. You cannot take away my fundamental and unalienable rights. You cannot steal my Constitution, because as Jeremy has said, and as I have reiterated numerous times here and on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, the Constitution belongs to we the people. We are the absolute sovereigns. It is the social contract between we the people and the government. And when they are breaching that contract, we are entitled to a redress of grievances. But we've forgotten that. But that's why we ask you to tune in and listen to us, so that we can hopefully spark that curiosity in you to go and dig deeper into your Constitution, because it does belong to you. And that is the greatest service that Jeremy and I can render here on the Wright Flyer. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I have sent the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Randy Wright, your captain. I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and I hope that you can join us again next time for our continuing shows, because remember, we do this all for you. And again, this is also Jeremy Grapington, my first officer, and I want to thank him also for helping me with each and every one of these shows. We are proud to provide this show to you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and take it home. Thank you again for flying the Wright Flyer.